"May I have your leftovers, sir?" But when the millionaire looked into her eyes, a miracle happened. Under the dim glow of chandeliers shaped like frozen stars, the hum of wealth whispered through every corner of Le Pavillon, the most exclusive restaurant nestled in the beating heart of the city. It was a night draped in velvet stillness, broken only by the soft elegance of a piano weaving through the air. Every table was a quiet kingdom of power and prestige, lit by candles and crowned by crystal. In the farthest corner, tucked behind an arrangement of orchids and shadow, sat John Maxwell, 48 years old, tech mogul, billionaire, and widower. His Armani suit was tailored to perfection, his platinum watch catching stray flickers of light, but none of it could cover the hollowness in his chest. He stared blankly at the untouched filet mignon before him, its aroma rich and inviting, though it might as well have been dust. Across from him, the empty chair echoed more loudly than any sound in the room. His fingers tightened slightly around the stem of a Bordeaux glass, the red swirl inside dancing like a ghost. 10 years had passed since the accident, since his wife Lillian and their 3-year-old son Caleb had vanished from the world in the crush of twisted metal and shattered glass. Since then, John had filled his life with silence, routine, and an empire of distractions. He lifted the glass slowly, as if the weight of it held memories. But just as he brought it to his lips, a voice broke the air beside him. Soft, trembling, unexpected. "May I have your leftovers, sir?" John froze. He turned his head sharply and found himself looking down at a young woman standing beside his table. She could not have been older than 19. Her blonde hair was pulled into a loose, messy bun, with strands falling out in weary curls. Her coat was threadbare, clinging to her shoulders against the early autumn chill. In her arms was a baby, perhaps 7 or 8 months old, wrapped in a faded blanket. The infant's eyes, wide and luminous, were fixed on the mound of mashed potatoes and slices of meat still steaming on John's plate. The girl's voice had been almost a whisper, yet somehow it had sliced through the quiet of the restaurant like a violin string snapping. John blinked as if waking from a long, dense sleep. Around him, the room stilled. Forks paused mid-air. Conversations trailed into stunned silence. A waiter began to step forward, concern already wrinkling his brow, but John raised a hand subtly. The gesture was small, yet commanding. He studied her face. There was no shame in her expression, no hint of manipulation or pity-seeking, only exhaustion and something deeper, a quiet fierceness, a need not for herself, but for the tiny life held close to her chest. She held the child with the kind of protective devotion that stripped everything else from the moment. She was not begging. She was not stealing. She was surviving. John's throat tightened. The candle between them flickered. In that instant, something shifted inside him. Not a grand epiphany, not yet, but a murmur, a spark. And though he did not know it then, that one moment, that single question, would dismantle the walls he had spent a decade building and lead him toward a redemption he never sought, through a love he never expected. He stood there for a long moment, frozen, his gaze locked on the girl, as if the rest of the world had melted away into background noise. Her blonde hair was unbrushed, falling in disheveled waves around her face and shoulders, the strands catching glimmers of candlelight like broken gold. Her coat barely covered her frame, sleeves too short, the fabric worn thin at the elbows. On her feet were a pair of sneakers, tattered, soaked in city grime, and nearly splitting at the seams. But it was not her appearance that made John's breath catch. It was her eyes. They did not beg. They did not waver. They held him, unflinching, filled with something far stronger than desperation, defense, dignity, and a quiet, almost unbearable sorrow. There was a kind of courage in her expression, the type a person only forges when they have nothing left to protect except the fragile life they carry. She was not asking for herself. She was asking for her child. John hesitated, just a heartbeat longer, as if some unseen thread was being pulled taut between them. Then, with a slight movement, he nudged the plate forward. "Take it," he said softly, almost to himself. She did not dive at the food. She did not devour it like someone starving. Instead, with a reverence that struck him harder than any scream could have, she reached into the satchel draped across her shoulder and took out a small square of cloth, clean though fraying at the edges. She carefully wrapped the mashed potatoes and the remaining slices of meat inside, folding the corners like she was preserving treasure, not leftovers. Then, kneeling gently onto one knee, she cradled the baby closer and retrieved a small plastic spoon from her coat pocket. John watched, unblinking, as she scooped a modest portion of the warm food and blew softly on it before guiding the spoon to the baby's mouth. The child opened instinctively, his tiny lips parting, his tongue reaching. The moment the mashed potatoes touched his tongue, he cooed, a soft, gurgling sound of joy so pure it made John's fingers curl around the edge of the table. The baby's face lit up in the glow of candlelight, his chubby hands patting the girl's chest, a smile blooming across his round cheeks, like a sunrise after a long, frozen night. It was the kind of smile John had not seen in years, not since his own son. Something caught in his throat. He looked away, just for a second, trying to clear the sudden mist from his vision. But his eyes snapped back as soon as the baby let out another happy sigh, as if the warmth of one spoonful was enough to fill him with delight. The girl said nothing. She simply kept feeding him, one spoonful at a time, with infinite patience. Her hands were steady, her breathing was calm. She did not once look around to see who might be judging her, or what opinions were forming in the silent sea of wealthy onlookers. She was there for one reason only: to feed her son. John's heart twisted in his chest, slow and deep, like something old waking from a coma. It was not pity. It was not charity. It was the undeniable truth that he was witnessing something sacred, a kind of love that could not be bought, replaced, or even fully understood by those who had never felt loss. When the baby seemed full, the girl carefully tucked the cloth bundle into her bag, adjusted the blanket around the child's body, and stood. She glanced once more at John, nodding slightly, not as if to thank him but as if to acknowledge something unspoken between them. Then she turned and walked away, weaving through the rows of white linen tables, out into the cool night beyond the glass doors. John remained seated, unable to move, staring at the spot where she had stood. The candle on the table flickered softly, casting gentle waves of gold and shadow across the untouched wine, the empty chair, the world he had known. Then, before he could rationalize or analyze or talk himself out of it, he rose. Not hurriedly, not dramatically, just quietly, with purpose. He placed his napkin on the table, nodded once at the stunned waiter who hovered nearby, and followed the girl through the heavy restaurant doors into the night. He did not yet understand why, only that he had to. John followed at a distance, his footsteps muffled against the quiet pavement. The city noise faded behind him as the girl slipped down a narrow alleyway, clutching the baby to her chest like a fragile shield against the world. She moved quickly but cautiously, as if every shadow might swallow her whole. He did not know why he followed, only that something deeper than curiosity pulled him along. It was not pity, it was recognition. The alley opened into a crumbling parking lot flanked by brick buildings. Abandoned cars sat like ghosts, but one, an old dented Navy sedan, was different. It was lived in. The windows were fogged, the paint was peeling, but it was shelter. She walked to it without hesitation, opened the back door and carefully settled in with the baby. A thin blanket served as a mattress. She cradled the infant in her arms, whispering something only the child could hear. Then her voice rose, soft and trembling, to a lullaby. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." John lingered in the shadows, transfixed. The baby's hand gripped her collar, eyes fluttering as the melody wrapped around him like a warm quilt. The setting was bleak, but the love undeniable. He stepped forward. Something must have alerted her. She turned, startled. Their eyes locked. "I'm sorry," he said, hands raised in peace. "I just wanted to see if you were okay." "You followed me," she said, guarded. "Yes, I did." She didn't run. She didn't cry. She only looked at him, weighing the stranger in the expensive clothes. "I saw how you fed your son," John said. "I've never seen anything like that. I needed to understand. After a pause, she said quietly, "His name is Noah. I'm Emily." "Noah?" he repeated. "8 months?" She nodded. "He loves mashed potatoes." John's voice dropped. "So did my son." Emily blinked, and in that instant something shifted. She didn't pry, just listened with that rare stillness of someone who knew grief firsthand. "I was studying to be a nurse," she said. "Then I got pregnant. The father disappeared. My parents disowned me. I've been on my own ever since." She spoke plainly, without bitterness. "We've lived in this car for 2 months. I clean houses, wait tables when I can." John looked at the vehicle, the worn blanket, the baby clothes stacked like treasure in the corner. "I can help. A hotel, food, whatever you need." She raised a hand. "No, I'm not asking for money." Surprised, he asked, "Then what do you want?" Emily looked at Noah and said softly, "Just one day where he's warm, full, and safe. That's all." The words hit him harder than any demand ever could. The streetlight flickered above them, casting an amber hue over her face. In that glow, John saw something familiar. Her eyes. His late wife's eyes. Not exactly, but close enough to crack something inside him. The way Emily clutched her child, the way she stood tall with nothing but love as armor. It stirred something in him, something that had been buried with his wife and son. He stepped back, suddenly unsteady. "Thank you," he said. Emily furrowed her brow. "For what?" "For reminding me I still have a heart." She said nothing, only cradled Noah tighter, resuming the lullaby. John stood there a little longer, the song threading through the night like a lifeline, and though Emily didn't smile, she didn't close the door either. And that, somehow, was everything. From that night on, John could not shake the image of the girl with the broken shoes and the baby with the mashed potato smile. No matter how many emails he skimmed through or board meetings he attended, their faces stayed with him. Quiet reminders that somewhere in the same city where people drank $800 0-cent wine, a mother and child were surviving on kindness and resilience alone. He never spoke to her again, not right away. Instead, he began to act, silently and precisely, the way he'd built his fortune. He had found her car again, parked behind an abandoned church lot. Without approaching, without intruding, he left small packages near the vehicle in the early mornings before sunrise. A canister of baby formula, a pack of diapers, a sealed container of homemade soup, still warm to the touch. He arranged for a pediatrician to make a discreet visit, pretending to be part of a church outreach program. Emily didn't know who had sent him. She didn't ask. But when the doctor left, she held Noah longer than usual and whispered "thank you" to no one in particular. At first, Emily was skeptical. She had learned to survive by expecting disappointment. But these quiet gestures never came with notes, never came with expectations or requests. No one asked her to smile. No one asked her to be grateful. It was simply there, steady, gentle, real. Little by little, suspicion gave way to something more dangerous: hope. Then, one evening, as October cold began seeping deeper into the nights, disaster struck. Noah had been cranky all afternoon, refusing to eat. His forehead was warm, but by nightfall he was burning with fever. Emily tried everything: cool cloths, gentle lullabies, rocking him back and forth in the back seat of their car. But his cries grew more urgent, his breathing shallow and fast. She rushed to the nearest hospital emergency room. The woman at the front desk barely looked up when Emily explained that her son needed help. When asked about insurance, Emily hesitated. When she said she didn't have any, the woman's face hardened. "We're at full capacity," she said curtly. "You'll need to wait or find another facility." Emily's voice broke. "He's only a baby. He has a fever of 104. He's not responding. Please." "Ma'am, there's nothing we can do without proper intake. I'm sorry." Emily stepped outside, her breath clouding in the freezing air. Noah had gone quiet, a terrifying silence. She held him tighter than ever, her body shaking with cold and panic. There was only one thing left she could do. She pulled out her old phone. Her fingers trembled as she typed just 2 words: "Help us." She didn't know if he would come, She didn't even know why she trusted that he might. But 6 minutes later, headlights swept across the curb. John's black SUV screeched to a halt. He jumped out before the engine stopped, his coat flaring in the wind, eyes wild with urgency. He didn't speak. He simply held out his arms. Emily placed Noah into them, and for the first time, the baby did not resist. His tiny hand curled around John's index finger, weak but intentional, as if recognizing something safe. John cradled him with surprising familiarity and strode back into the hospital without waiting in line. "I want a doctor, now," he said to the receptionist, voice steel and fire. "This child has a critical fever. I will cover every cent. But if you let one more minute pass, I will buy this hospital and fire every last one of you." They took Noah immediately. Emily sat in the hallway, shivering with exhaustion, her head in her hands. John stayed by her side, silent. When the nurse returned with updates, Noah was stable, resting, and would be monitored overnight. Emily exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding since sunset. She looked at John, eyes glassy, voice barely audible. "You came." He nodded. "Of course I did." Tears spilled over before she could stop them. She leaned into him, chest heaving with relief and something deeper, grief maybe, or release. Her head rested against his shoulder, and John, without hesitation, wrapped his arms around her. He did not ask her to calm down. He did not ask her to explain herself. He just held her as the quiet hours of the night passed outside those sterile, fluorescent walls. It was the first time Emily had let herself fall apart since she'd become a mother, and for John it was the first time in 10 years that holding someone didn't feel like betrayal. They did not speak of love. They did not define anything that night. But something shifted irrevocably in that moment, in the steady heartbeat of the man who had once sworn never to care again, and in the breath of the girl who had only known how to survive, not because he had rescued her, but because finally she did not have to be strong alone. It began with a photo, slightly blurry, taken at night, of John Maxwell exiting an emergency room with a baby in his arms and a young woman close behind. Within hours, it flooded social media, blogs and tabloid headlines. Tech billionaire's late-night rescue, teen mom and the tycoon. The internet exploded. Emily's identity didn't stay private for long. A leaked hospital intake form confirmed her name. Then came the commentary, waves of speculation, judgment, and cruelty. Some praised John, calling him compassionate, generous. Others were vicious. "She's a gold digger. This was planned. What kind of man gets caught up in something like this?" In the apartment John had arranged for her and Noah, Emily sat in darkness, the only light from her phone. Each swipe brought more venom. Each headline, more shame. Her chest tightened. Her hands trembled. She turned off the screen, afraid the light alone might touch her son with that same poison. Noah stirred in his crib. She stood and gently placed a hand over his chest, soothing him. Then she sat back down on the edge of the bed and stared at the floor until morning. When John walked in, he knew something had changed. Emily's posture was closed off, her expression distant. "I can't do this," she said. "I don't want my son growing up in scandal. I don't want him seeing lies one day and wondering if they're true." John sat beside her. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said softly. "Neither did Noah." She shook her head. "People don't care. They already decided who I am." John's voice steadied. "Then let me tell them who you really are." That afternoon, he called his publicist. No statements, no scripted press release. He wanted to speak plainly, publicly, and with no filters. The next night he went live on national television. The setup was simple, a quiet studio, soft lighting, no distractions. The interviewer asked nothing shocking, just gave him space to speak. John began not with Emily, but with Lillian and Caleb. He told the story he had avoided for years, the accident, the silence, the way grief had hollowed him out. He talked about the illusion of success and how it had hidden a very real emptiness. "I stopped living the day they died," he said, and then he spoke of Emily. "She wasn't looking for charity," he said. "She wasn't even looking for help. She just wanted to feed her son, and in doing so, she woke something in me I thought I had lost forever. His voice cracked as he added, "She didn't take anything from me. She gave me something no one else could, a reason to care again, a reason to breathe." He looked into the camera. "Emily is not a headline. She is a mother. Noah is not a prop. He is a beautiful child. I did not save them, they saved me." The interview was raw, unguarded, and deeply human. And it worked. The next morning the tide shifted. Online conversations changed. People began defending her. Mothers shared their stories. Single parenthood, poverty, judgment. Nurses spoke up, explaining how many girls like Emily fall through the cracks. Donations started flowing into shelters. A mother in Kansas started a community fund for women just like Emily. Emily didn't speak to the press. But the next morning, she showed up at John's front door, Noah bundled against the cold. She didn't knock. He opened the door before she could. Her eyes were tired but determined. "I'm not leaving," she said. "If you still want us, we're here." John did not speak. He stepped aside, let them in, and for the first time in years, he felt something shift, permanent and peaceful. A door, not just in his home, but in his heart, opened. A family, unexpected and unscripted, had begun. The apartment John rented for them was nothing extravagant, modest by his standards, but warm, sunlit, and quiet. It had 2 bedrooms, soft gray walls, and windows that caught the morning light just right. Emily moved in with nothing but 2 duffel bags, a baby carrier, and the weight of someone who had never been given a safe place to exhale. But within a week, that space began to feel lived in. Pictures colored by Noah taped to the fridge, small socks draped over the heater, the scent of baby lotion and lullabies lingering in the air. They never discussed what they were to each other. Not at first. There were no declarations, no labels, no timelines. They simply lived together. John visited every morning. At first it was under the pretense of checking in, bringing groceries or a package of diapers, but soon it became routine. He would knock, let himself in, and Noah would light up with recognition, bouncing in his crib at the sound of the door. Emily would already have coffee brewing, her hair pulled into that same loose, graceful knot, and they would share breakfast, stories. John learned how to hold a baby bottle at just the right angle, how to warm milk without overheating it, how to change a diaper, clumsily at first, then with a confidence that surprised even him. He memorized the rhythm of Noah's cries, understood the difference between hunger and discomfort, tiredness and frustration. One afternoon, as he rocked Noah to sleep, the baby's small hand clinging to his shirt, John realized something simple but seismic. He didn't want to leave, not after the nap, not after the next hour. He wanted to stay. Emily noticed it too, the way John lingered, how he listened to Noah's babbles like they were symphonies. He never tried to impress or control. He simply showed up, day after day, with quiet hands and eyes that had once been hollow but were now slowly refilling with light. She had never known love that didn't ask for anything back. But she had never known a man to simply be present, not to fix her, not to own her story, but to walk beside her in it. In the soft hours between feedings and bath times, a new kind of connection formed. It was not the fiery kind of love the world romanticized. It was slower, deeper, born not from passion, but from persistence. One evening, after Noah had finally fallen asleep, Emily and John sat on the balcony in silence, a blanket draped between them. The city below glimmered in gold and blue, but neither of them looked down. John turned toward her, his voice gentle. "When I lost Lillian and Caleb, I thought that part of me died with them. The part that wanted to care, to belong, to be needed." Emily looked at him, eyes glistening in the moonlight. "You didn't lose it," she whispered. "It just waited." They didn't kiss that night. They didn't have to. The moment stretched between them like a promise, unspoken, but deeply understood. And in that moment, Emily smiled. Not the kind of smile she gave nurses out of politeness or Noah out of reflex. This one was just for him, full and rare. For the first time in years, John smiled back, a real smile, quiet, softened by healing, lit from within. They were not yet lovers, they were not yet a family in name, but they were something stronger. Two people who had been broken open by loss and found in each other the slow and steady beginning of home. It came one afternoon in a plain white envelope, wedged beneath the apartment door like an unexpected gust of wind. Emily stared at it for a long time before opening it, her hands trembling slightly as she unfolded the letter inside. The handwriting was familiar, tight, neat, and unmistakably her mother's. There were only a few lines, no grand apology, no dramatic pleas, just simple words written in ink that seemed to press too hard on the page. "If there's still a chance to know my grandson, I would like to try." Emily sat at the kitchen table for over an hour, the letter crumpled gently in her hands as Noah played nearby with his stack of colorful blocks. She didn't cry. She didn't get angry, but the silence that filled the room was thick enough to suffocate. When John arrived that evening, he found her in the same spot. "She wrote," Emily said quietly without looking up. He walked over, picked up the letter, and read it. Then he set it down and took a seat beside her. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "I don't know," she admitted. "It's been almost 2 years since they last spoke to me, since they told me I was no longer their daughter." John nodded slowly. "You don't owe them anything." Emily turned to him, eyes clouded with uncertainty. "But Noah, doesn't he deserve to know where he comes from, even if it's broken?" John paused, choosing his words carefully. "Don't let him grow up with the same emptiness you had. Let him have the chance to forgive, or not, but let him choose." 3 days later they drove to the town Emily once called home, a sleepy stretch of green hills and narrow roads, where every face seemed to remember the past a little too well. Her parents' house stood at the end of a gravel driveway, the white paint slightly faded, the porch swing still creaking in the wind. Emily stood outside for several long moments, Noah on her hip, his tiny hands gripping her sweater. John stood slightly behind her, offering quiet support, but letting her lead. The front door opened slowly. A woman stepped out, mid-50s, sharp features softened by time and sorrow. Emily's mother. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then, with a trembling breath, her mother stepped forward. Her eyes landed on Noah, then on Emily, and they filled instantly with tears. "I wasn't strong," she whispered, her voice catching. "I was scared of what people would think, of losing the version of you I thought I raised, and I lost you anyway." Emily said nothing. Her lips parted slightly, her jaw tightening. Her father appeared behind her mother, older than she remembered, his hands folded nervously in front of him. He looked at his grandson like he was seeing something holy. Noah reached out a hand, not knowing the history, not caring, just curious. And that somehow shattered everything. Her mother broke down, stepping forward, arms open but uncertain. May I hold him?" Emily hesitated only a moment. Then, slowly, she placed Noah in her mother's arms. The older woman clutched him as if trying to hold time itself. She sobbed softly, whispering things to the boy who blinked up at her with innocent wonder. John watched from the side, his chest tight. He wasn't part of this moment, but he was witness to its power. When Emily finally stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her mother, the porch seemed to breathe. The past had not disappeared, but it had been softened. Forgiveness was not a lightning strike. It was a slow sunrise. That afternoon, the 3 generations sat around the old kitchen table where Emily once ate cereal before school. Her mother served tea. Her father bounced Noah gently on his knee, and for the first time in years, there was laughter in that house. Emily caught John's gaze from across the room, and he smiled. She mouthed 2 simple words. "Thank you." He shook his head, smiling back. "No," he whispered to himself, barely audible. "Thank you for going home." 1 year later, the world had changed, but only in the ways that mattered. The noise had faded. The headlines were gone. In their place was something far quieter, far more powerful. A life. It was a bright spring afternoon when they returned to the park. The same park where it all began. The breeze moved gently through the trees, and the golden sunlight bathed the open field in a warmth that felt like a benediction. There were no towering floral arches or photographers jostling for the perfect shot. Just a small group of close friends, a white linen cloth spread beneath an old oak tree, and a humble wooden arch wrapped with ivy and ribbon. At the center of it all stood a little boy in a navy new vest and matching bow tie. Noah, now nearly 2 years old, clutched a small velvet box in both hands as he wobbled across the grass, determined to deliver it to the man waiting just a few steps away. John stood there, not in a designer suit, but in a soft gray blazer that Emily had once told him made him look almost human. His hair was longer now, with threads of silver he no longer bothered to hide. His eyes, once clouded by grief, now sparkled with something far rarer than wealth: hope. As Noah reached him, John knelt down and took the box gently from his tiny fingers. The boy looked up and giggled, then toddled back to the edge of the clearing where Emily stood barefoot on the grass, her white dress fluttering in the breeze. She had never looked more beautiful, not because of the dress, not because of the sun behind her, but because of the life in her eyes, the kind of radiance that only grows after surviving darkness. John stepped forward, box in hand, and dropped to one knee. For a moment, the wind seemed to still, as if the world itself paused to listen. He looked up at her, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "You didn't ask for anything," he said softly. "You didn't beg. You didn't expect. You just showed up, on the worst night of your life, and gave me a chance to remember what it feels like to be needed, to be alive." He opened the box, revealing a simple ring, elegant, unflashy, chosen not for its price, but for the way it would look on her hand when she held their son. "You didn't take my leftovers, Emily," he whispered. "You gave me everything I didn't know I was missing. You gave me family. You gave me love. You gave me a future." He paused, tears glimmering in his eyes. "Will you marry me?" Emily's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filled before the first tear could even fall. She nodded, once, twice, then dropped to her knees in front of him, laughing through her tears as she whispered, "Yes." They embraced, arms folding into one another like pieces of a puzzle long lost and finally found. The minister began the ceremony, simple and short, while Noah played with the petals on the ground, occasionally glancing up as if trying to understand what made the grown-ups so emotional. But it was during the vows, right as John promised to love not just Emily, but the son who had brought them together, that Noah wandered up and wrapped his arms around John's leg. "Daddy," he chirped. And just like that, the entire park held its breath. John looked down, eyes wet, and bent to pick up the boy. Holding him with one arm and Emily with the other, he whispered, "I love you, son." In that embrace, under the sun, with no audience but a few friends and the sky, everything that had once been broken felt whole again. John had not rescued a young mother. She had rescued him. From grief, from isolation, from a life so polished and empty it had nearly swallowed him whole. And in the place of loneliness, a new family had been born. Not from blood, not from planning, but from a whisper, a question, and a plate of mashed potatoes. They were not perfect. They didn't need to be. They were together. And that, finally, was enough. And so, from a single whisper in a luxury restaurant, a story of love, redemption, and second chances unfolded. What began as a request for leftovers became a journey that redefined what it means to be a family. John didn't just open his heart, he opened his life. Emily didn't just survive, she found home. And little Noah, once cradled in a stranger's arms, now walks beside a father who chose him not by blood but by love. Because sometimes the most extraordinary stories are born from the quietest moments. If this story touched your heart, made you feel, made you hope, or even brought a tear to your eye, don't forget to like, share, and most importantly, subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories, the channel where every story is made to heal your soul and remind you that compassion is the most powerful miracle of all. We'll see you in the next story. Poor mechanic fixed a bedroom light at 2 a.m. Then the lonely millionaire whispered, "Stay with me tonight." The rain hammered down on the glass roof like 1,000 desperate fists, relentless and wild. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the vast, high-ceilinged living room of the mansion for a split second before darkness swallowed it whole. "I said send someone! I don't care what time it is!" Monica's voice cracked through the phone, her tone sharp, teetering between command and panic. "This isn't just about a broken light. I can't be in the dark, not again." The line crackled in her ear, the dispatcher stammering something about limited emergency coverage during the storm, but Monica had already stopped listening. She hung up, the screen of her phone dimming just as the last overhead light flickered twice, then went dead. Total silence. Then, thunder roared, shaking the windows. A sudden vacuum of light turned her entire home into a shadowy abyss. Monica stood frozen in the center of her marble-floored hallway, her breath catching in her throat. Her tall, slender frame trembled, her blonde hair clinging to the sides of her face, damp with sweat, not rain. Her fingers fumbled in the dark as she turned toward the hallway, nearly tripping over a decorative stool in her panic. She bolted upstairs, nearly slipping, until she reached the sanctuary of her bedroom. She yanked open the top drawer of her nightstand. A flashlight, thank God. She clicked the switch. Nothing. She shook it desperately. The dim bulb glowed faintly for a heartbeat, then died. "No, no, no," she gasped, dropping to her knees. Her hands flew across the drawer, scattering pens, receipts, a sleeping pill bottle. Empty. She pressed herself back against the bed, hugging her knees, her breath becoming ragged. Her chest rose and fell, too fast, too sharp. In the pitch black, Monica's eyes widened, searching for light that did not exist. She could hear her heartbeat now, that rhythmic thud echoing in her ears, deafening in the silence. But beneath it, under the thunder, another sound rose in her memory, the faint drip of water in a concrete corner, the creak of old stairs above her, the soft rustle of rats in the dark, that horrible, endless darkness. 14 years old, shoved into a cold, damp basement by a man whose face she never saw. 3 days, no light, no food, no escape. The memory gripped her like icy hands. Her body convulsed in a silent sob as she curled tighter, her nails digging into her arms. The dark had never left her, not truly. She thought she had overcome it. Years of therapy, success, control, money. But none of that mattered now, because the darkness was back, and it knew her name. She managed to crawl back to her phone, hands shaking violently. Her finger trembled as she redialed the emergency line. This time, she didn't yell. Her voice was a whisper, raw and pleading. "Please, just send someone. I'll pay whatever it takes. Just don't leave me here in the dark." She didn't wait for an answer. She ended the call and dropped the phone beside her. Her eyes adjusted slightly, but all she could see were the outlines of the furniture, dark shapes looming like ghosts. She crawled into bed, pulled the covers to her chin like a child hiding from monsters, and stared wide-eyed into the void. In the distance, the storm raged on, but inside the mansion, it was silent, and that was worse, because in silence, the past returned. Every breath was a battle. Every second in the dark was a second too long. The cold wrapped around her like a second skin. She bit down hard on her lip, blood filling her mouth, but at least it grounded her. It reminded her she was here, now, not in that basement. Her mind drifted to the light she always kept on in the corner of her room, the one her therapist told her was okay to rely on. That one comfort, always on, no matter what. But tonight it had failed her. She glanced toward the lamp, but there was only darkness. Monica pulled the covers tighter, her entire body trembling uncontrollably. The shadows danced with each flicker of lightning from outside. Her lips moved silently, reciting fragments of affirmations she barely believed anymore. "I am safe. I am here. This is not then. This is not." The creak of the floorboard outside her room made her jolt. For a moment her breath stopped completely, but there was no one, just the house, settling, breathing, like it always did. She buried her face in the pillow, muffling the next sob. Somewhere deep down, the part of her that had always survived, the part that had clawed her way back from that basement, built an empire and made the world fear her name, screamed at her to hold on. Just a little longer. Someone would come. She had paid enough. She had begged. Someone would come. Please, let someone come. Let there be light. Let there be light. Rick sat at the edge of his narrow bed, the glow of a nightlight illuminating a sleeping child curled up beneath a worn blanket. Lily's breathing was steady but shallow, her little chest rising and falling with the gentle rhythm of sleep. A soft cough escaped her lips, and Rick winced. He glanced at the clock on the wall, 2:07 OM. His phone buzzed, cutting through the silence like a warning bell. He picked it up, his brow furrowing as he read the emergency dispatch notification. Urgent electrical repair, high pay, Beverly Hills zip code. He rubbed his tired eyes. He had already worked a 12-hour shift, done 3 side jobs, and still came home to bills he could not pay and a surgery he could not afford. Lily's heart wasn't going to fix itself. He looked back at his daughter, sleeping peacefully despite the weak heartbeat she carried. Rick stood, grabbed his tool bag, and slid quietly out the door. The rain had not let up all night. As he stepped outside, a wall of water met him. He pulled the hood of his worn-out raincoat over his head and jogged to his truck, wipers already struggling against the torrent. The roads were slick, headlights bouncing off puddles like ghostly flickers. The city never looked lonelier than it did in the middle of a storm. 15 minutes later, he pulled up to the gate of a sprawling mansion, nearly invisible behind a wall of hedges and iron fencing. No one came to greet him. He checked the address again, then drove up the private driveway. At the front door, rainwater already dripping from his sleeves, he reached up to knock, but before he could, the door cracked open. Monica stood behind it, barefoot, her silk robe clinging to her slender frame. Her blonde hair was damp at the ends, her face pale, eyes wide and glassy. Her fingers trembled as they tried to twist the antique doorknob fully. She said nothing. Her lips parted like she wanted to speak, but no sound came. Rick, seeing her struggle, gently reached past her and finished opening the door. She flinched, just slightly, but didn't step back. Their eyes met. Rick had seen cold before. He had seen fear. But this was something else. This was a woman trying not to shatter into pieces. He nodded slightly, just enough to say he understood without asking anything. Then he stepped inside. She didn't lead him. She just turned, and he followed her through the dim corridor of the mansion. No lights, just shadows. Her bare feet made soft contact with the marble floor. Rick removed his shoes at the threshold without being asked. They reached her bedroom, a cavernous space with cathedral ceilings, designer furnishings, and a single broken lamp sitting crooked on the nightstand. He set down his bag and pulled out a small tool kit. Monica stood near the bed, watching him like a ghost watching the living. He reached for the lamp and began unscrewing the cover. Behind him, he felt her presence grow closer. He paused when her hand, small, shaking, slightly touched the fabric of his sleeve. He turned his head slightly, just enough to catch her eyes. I'm sorry, she stammered, barely audible. I can't be alone in the dark. Rick gave her the smallest, warmest smile he could manage. It's okay. I'm right here. You don't have to be afraid. The moment stretched between them. Then he gently placed a reassuring hand over hers and guided her back toward the bed. He helped her sit, careful, slow, never forceful. Never forceful. From his jacket pocket, he pulled out a small LED flashlight. He turned it on and set it beside her pillow. Its soft glow lit her face in gold and comfort. Just keep this by your side, he said softly. I'll fix it fast. Monica clutched the flashlight like a lifeline. Her fingers wrapped tightly around it, her knuckles whitening. Her lips quivered, but she nodded. Rick didn't ask her what happened. He didn't ask why a woman with everything money could buy sat trembling in her own room, unable to face the dark. He just went to work. Quiet, efficient, steady. And Monica, for the first time in years, watched someone move inside her house without fear, without judgment. He didn't fill the silence. He didn't intrude. But somehow, with a single gesture and a single light, he made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she was not completely alone. The soft, amber light of the repaired bedside lamp glowed steadily now, casting gentle shadows along the walls of Monica's bedroom. The storm outside had dulled to a rhythmic patter, but inside, the tension still clung to the air like fog. Rick had finished his work 15 minutes ago. The light was fixed, the wires had been replaced, the voltage regulated. He could have packed up and left, but he didn't. He remained seated in the armchair near the bed, his body still, hands resting lightly on his knees, tools already tucked away in his bag. But his eyes weren't on the lamp. They were on her. Monica sat, curled on the edge of the bed, still clutching the small flashlight like it was a lifeline. She hadn't said a word since he fixed the light. Her eyes stared out the window, but not at the rain, at something far beyond it. Rick didn't push. He waited, letting the silence settle. Then he spoke, his voice low, steady. "Sometimes," he said, "the darkest places stay with us longer than they should." The words hung there for a moment. They didn't ask for anything. They offered something. Monica blinked, slowly turning her head toward him, her lips parted, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. Her voice, when it came, was brittle. "Have you ever been trapped somewhere?" Rick hesitated, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he did. "Not like you mean," he said honestly. "But yeah, trapped in bills, in broken promises, in a tiny apartment that smells like mold and cheap floor polish. Trapped watching my daughter get sicker every month, knowing I can't afford the cure." He exhaled. "So yeah, I know what it feels like when there's no light at the end." Monica didn't respond right away. Her fingers tightened around the flashlight, her knuckles pale. Then, with a slow inhale, she said something she hadn't said out loud in nearly 2 decades. "I was 14. Rick looked up. Monica's eyes were glassy, fixed somewhere beyond him. "He grabbed me on my way home from school. I never saw his face. He pushed me into the back of a van and drove for hours. No windows, no sound, just my breathing and the engine." Her breath shook. She closed her eyes. "He kept me in a basement, no lights, no clock, just concrete walls and a leaking pipe. I counted 3 days, I think, but it could have been 5 or 1. I lost time. I stopped screaming after the first night." She blinked hard. "When they found me, I hadn't said a word in 20 hours. I stopped speaking, just stopped." Rick didn't move, didn't react with the horror most people did when hearing that kind of story. He didn't gasp or offer platitudes. He just listened. Monica finally looked at him, expecting judgment, pity, discomfort. What she saw was none of those things. Rick's face was calm, steady, present. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't say, "That's awful." He didn't say, "You're so strong." He simply leaned forward, gently picked up the untouched cup of tea on her nightstand, now cold, and walked quietly to her kitchenette area in the corner of the suite. He returned a minute later with a fresh cup, steaming, the aroma of chamomile filling the space. He set it down beside her, carefully, and said, "This one's hot." That was all. Monica stared at the cup, then at him, and something inside her cracked. Not in pain, but in quiet recognition. This man, this mechanic who had walked into her darkness at 2 in the morning, hadn't tried to fix her. He had simply sat with her in the dark. That, she realized, was something no one had ever done. She reached for the tea with both hands, cradling the warmth like a fragile thing. "Thank you," she whispered. Rick gave her a nod, nothing more. But in that nod, Monica felt something shift. Not in the room, in herself. Rick glanced at the now steady lamp one last time. The rain had lightened into a soft drizzle outside. The thunder faded into the distance. The storm had moved on. But inside Monica's room, the air still held its hush, delicate, uncertain. He stood slowly, gathering his tool bag with quiet precision, careful not to disturb the fragile calm that had settled between them. "I should head out," he said gently, his voice low so it would not feel intrusive. Monica's eyes followed him as he moved toward the door. Then, just as he reached for the handle, she spoke, not loudly, but clearly, each word trembling like a breath. "Can you stay just a little longer?" Rick stopped. He turned slowly, his hand still on the doorframe. Her eyes were wide, not commanding, not guarded, but pleading, honest. It was not about fear of being alone. It was about not wanting to return to that space she had just escaped, the one deep inside her that had been silent for so long. He nodded, once, no hesitation. "Sure." She exhaled a breath she had been holding, without realizing. Monica didn't say anything else. She just turned back to the bed and sat again, her hands wrapped around the warm tea he had brought her. Rick pulled the armchair a little closer and sat across from her. Neither of them spoke. The only sound was the rain sliding down the tall windows, the occasional distant rustle of wind through the trees. The golden glow from the bedside lamp painted their faces in amber. Monica looked smaller under the soft light, the lines around her eyes less sharp, her shoulders less guarded. She was no longer the reclusive millionaire or the woman with the high walls and tight smile. She was just Monica. And Rick? He was not a mechanic in that moment. He was not a man buried under overdue bills or a father desperate to save his child. He was simply someone who stayed when asked. Monica sipped her tea slowly. Her eyes, heavy from days of restlessness, began to drift. Her body, finally warm and safe, surrendered to something she had long forgotten. Peace. Without a word, she lay down, her cheek resting against the pillow. The flashlight he had given her was still in her hand, but her grip had loosened. Within minutes, her breath deepened, steady, rhythmic, sleep. Not medicated, not forced, not stolen by exhaustion, real, restful sleep. Rick sat for a while longer, just to be sure. Then with slow, deliberate movements, he stood. He walked quietly to the edge of the bed and pulled the blanket over her. She didn't stir. He looked at her, this woman who had trusted him with her most broken moment, and felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Not pity, not curiosity, something closer to reverence. He reached into his bag, pulled out a small notepad, and tore a page carefully. On it he scribbled a line, then placed it gently on the nightstand beside her. He didn't linger. He stepped out into the night, the rain now nothing more than a whisper against the trees. Inside, Monica stirred slightly in her sleep. Her hand reached out instinctively, brushing against the paper. She blinked slowly awake, just enough to see the words written in neat, straightforward handwriting. "Your light is fixed, but if it ever flickers again, I'll come back." Her fingers curled around the note. She held it close to her chest, eyes closed again, a quiet smile ghosting across her lips. And for the first time in years, she let herself sleep through the night. Not because the light was on, but because someone had promised to return if it ever went out. The rain came again, 3 nights later, not as fierce as the last storm, but steady enough to draw out memories and silence. Rick was cleaning out the gutters behind his rental apartment when his phone rang. The screen lit up with a number he recognized but hadn't expected to see again. "Monica?" he answered, wiping his hands on his jeans. There was a pause on the line, then her voice. Soft, hesitant, but clear. "Hi, sorry to bother you again. I think another light's acting up, the one in the kitchen." Rick hesitated, just for a moment. "I can come by in an hour." When he arrived, the rain had already begun to tap gently on the leaves surrounding the gated property. The house looked the same, but something felt different, warmer. Monica opened the door before he could even knock. She was dressed in jeans and a cream-colored sweater this time, her hair loose, her face calm. "Come in," she said with a small smile. "And you don't have to take your shoes off this time." Rick smiled back, stepping into the foyer. She led him to the kitchen. The light above the island was glowing perfectly. He looked up, then turned back to her. "It's working fine." Monica shifted slightly, then gave a sheepish shrug. "I know, I guess I wanted some company." Rick set his bag down on the counter and leaned back casually. "Well," he said, "this is probably the nicest fake repair call I've ever had." She laughed. Quietly, but it was a laugh. The sound surprised even her. They moved into the living room. Monica brought out 2 cups of tea, and placed them on the low glass table between them. "I tried to cook," she said, nodding toward the dining area. "It's not fancy, just pasta. I followed a YouTube video. It promised to be idiot-proof." "You're already doing better than me," Rick replied. "Last time I tried a recipe from YouTube, the fire alarm went off." They ate together at the long dining table, the room now dimly lit by recessed lights and the soft flicker of rain outside the windows. The pasta was slightly overcooked, but Rick said nothing. Instead, he asked her about her home, her favorite books, whether she'd always lived alone. Monica answered in pieces, fragments of a life built on distance and silence, now slowly rediscovered. She admitted for the first time that she had not slept with the lights off in almost 20 years. Rick told her about Lily. "Some nights," he said, his voice roughening just slightly, "she looks at me and asks, 'Daddy, am I going to die?' And I don't know what to say that's honest, but won't scare her more." Monica set down her fork, her eyes fixed on his. "I'm sorry," she said, but this time it wasn't out of pity, it was understanding. They moved back to the living room after dinner. Monica poured them both a glass of wine. Rick pulled out his phone and scrolled through a playlist. Soft piano notes began to play from the Bluetooth speaker tucked in the corner of the room. Monica tilted her head, eyes drifting shut for a moment. "I used to play this," she murmured, "before everything went dark." Rick looked at her then, not the kind of look that asked for more, but the kind that simply said, "I hear you." She turned to face him fully. "You know," she said, almost to herself, "everyone thinks I'm cold, untouchable, even the people I've let get close, but the truth is, I'm just tired of hurting people or being hurt." Rick's reply was soft. "Sometimes being alone feels safer than hoping someone might stay." She looked down, then smiled. Not a mask this time, but a real one, shy and unguarded. "I don't want to be alone tonight," she said, "but not in the way people usually mean." Rick leaned back, his gaze steady. "I get it," he said. "I'm not here to fix you, Monica." She nodded. "Good, because I'm not broken, just figuring out how to live again." And then, for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Monica laughed again, genuinely, freely. It was the kind of laugh that rose from something deep, something finally waking up. Rick didn't need to say anything. He just smiled quietly, watching her, and in that moment he saw the woman she truly was. Not cold, not unreachable, just a soul trying to find her way back to the light. The sky was pale and clear the next afternoon, sunlight slipping through the tall glass windows of Monica's living room. Rick had arrived early to help Monica fix a leaky faucet in her guest bathroom, but their work had turned into another quiet, easy conversation over coffee and laughter. For a moment, the past felt far away. Then, the doorbell rang. Monica opened the front door to find a man in his late 30s leaning casually against the frame, dressed in a sharp blazer and too much cologne. His hair was styled like he still thought he was 25. "Travis?" she said, her smile immediately stiffening. "Cousin Monica?" he said with forced cheer. "You look very insulated in here." She didn't answer. Her body instinctively shifted to block his view of the interior, but it was too late. His eyes flicked past her shoulder and caught sight of Rick walking through the hallway with a wrench in his hand. "Ah," Travis said, nodding slightly. "So this is the handyman I've been hearing about. A little younger than I expected." Monica's jaw tensed. "He's here to help with the faucet." Travis smirked, stepping inside without being invited. He glanced around with mild disdain. "Helping with the plumbing now, huh? Is that what we're calling it?" Monica's spine straightened. "Don't!" Travis chuckled, raising both hands. "Relax, I'm just saying, you always did have a soft spot for broken things. Must be why you let me hang around for so long before kicking me out." The memory slammed into her chest. Years ago, she'd trusted Travis with access to her accounts while she was in recovery from a health scare. He'd drained tens of thousands from her before disappearing, and when she pressed charges, the family turned on her. He looked past her again, calling out louder this time. "So, buddy, how's it feel? Must be nice doing house calls in neighborhoods like this." Rick appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, brows raised slightly. He didn't respond to Travis. He looked at Monica instead, quietly reading the shift in her energy. "I can finish up the sink next time," he said calmly, already placing the wrench back in his bag. "Don't worry about it." Monica didn't stop him. She couldn't speak, couldn't explain the sudden shame curling in her chest. Rick offered a small smile. "It's okay. Maybe next time." Then he was gone. The door closed behind him with a soft click, but it echoed like a slammed door in her chest. Travis shrugged, turning toward the liquor cabinet. "Still drinking the expensive stuff, huh? Good to see you haven't changed." But Monica wasn't listening anymore. She was staring at the closed door, her breath shallow. Her cousin's words hadn't been sharp, but they had been enough. They reminded her that she wasn't someone people defended, that even when someone like Rick came close, one wrong moment, one careless assumption, could unravel everything. Because in her world, people took, lied, hurt, even the ones she once loved. She walked past Travis without a word and climbed the stairs to her bedroom. Inside, the room felt colder without Rick's presence. The little flashlight he had given her still sat on the nightstand. She reached for it and turned it on, letting the soft beam cut through the early evening shadows. It was the first time she had ever wanted someone to stay, and still told them to go. She lay on her side, curled into the blanket, the light still glowing beside her. Monica had always believed she was safer alone. But tonight, for the first time, she wondered if that belief had just cost her something she didn't yet know how to ask for. And somewhere, beneath all the silence and steel she'd wrapped around her heart, a whisper rose. What if I pushed away the only person who ever stayed without asking for anything in return? The envelope sat untouched on Monica's desk for hours. It was from Senny Laura's Children's Hospital, addressed to her in clinical sterile font. Inside were medical documents, details she had requested after pulling a few strings, using connections she hadn't called in for years. The name listed was Lily Carson, age 6. Congenital heart defect, high risk, requires surgery within 2 months. The estimated cost was a wall no single father could climb alone. She stared at the photos attached. Lily smiling weakly in a hospital gown, a heart-shaped balloon tied to her eye. Rick hadn't asked, he never would. But she remembered his voice that night, low and cracking. She looks at me and asks, "Daddy, am I going to die?" The next morning, Monica called the hospital administrator and wired the full amount for the surgery, recovery care, and post-op medications. She signed the donation under a pseudonym she created in the moment, Hope Grant. When asked if she wanted her name shared with the family, she replied quietly, "Never." 3 weeks later, the surgery took place. Rick paced the small waiting area in threadbare jeans and an old flannel shirt. His hands trembled with every minute that passed. When the doctor finally emerged and gave a small nod with a tired smile, Rick collapsed into the nearest chair, head in his hands, sobbing. He was still crying when they let him into the room. Lily lay small and pale, but breathing easily. A beeping monitor played the sweetest rhythm he had ever heard. He knelt by her bed, kissed her tiny fingers, and whispered, "You made it, baby. You made it." Then the nurse came in with a folder of post-op details. Inside was a brief note, "All expenses covered by Hope Grant." Rick's eyebrows pulled together. "Who's Hope Grant?" The nurse shrugged. "Just the donor. No contact information. No explanation, just showed up one day and took care of everything." He stared at the name, the quiet mystery of it. Tears rushed back uninvited, and he held his daughter again, tighter than before. Down the hallway, Monica stood behind the large observation window, hidden in the quiet corridor that looked into Lily's room. She had come alone, wearing a simple coat and sunglasses. No security, no assistant, just her and the moment. She didn't need to go inside. She didn't need thanks. She only needed to know that Lily's heart was still beating, and that Rick no longer had to choose between groceries and hope. Her own chest rose and fell with quiet emotion as she watched the man who had once brought her a flashlight, now holding his little girl like the most fragile treasure on earth. Tears slid down Monica's cheek, but she didn't wipe them away. She just smiled. Not the guarded, practiced smile she wore for boardrooms and interviews. This one was small, honest, human. She pressed her hand gently to the glass, as if reaching for something she could not touch. Not yet. It had been years since she had given anything without expecting control in return. Even longer since she'd loved someone without needing to be sure they'd stay. But Rick had already stayed once when she had nothing to give. This was her way of answering that. She stayed at the window until the sun began to rise behind the hills, casting golden light into the room where Lily slept safely. Then, without a word, she turned and walked away. The letter came in a plain white envelope, no return address, just her name in simple, clean handwriting. Monica opened it at the kitchen counter, morning light turning everything gold. My daughter's heart beats because someone believed I was worth saving. If you ever need to hear the same, know that you are. She read it again, slower. Her fingers trembled as she held it to her chest. It was his writing, direct, unadorned. But within those lines, he'd given her something she thought she'd never feel again: belief. Tears blurred her vision as she reached for her phone. When Rick arrived an hour later, Monica opened the door herself. Her hand was steady, her voice calm. She smiled. "Hi, hi," he replied softly. She stepped onto the porch, nodded toward the garden. "Come with me." They walked barefoot through dew-soaked grass. The chill clung to them like memory. In the yard, she paused and turned to him. "There's still a lot of darkness in me," she said, "but maybe we can light it together." Rick looked at her, open, steady, then he reached out. Their hands met for the first time. Warm, certain. A soft rain began to fall, cleansing. She didn't flinch. Let it soak her. Let it remind her she was still healing. He squeezed her hand. Neither let go. 1 year later, spring returned. The garden bloomed in soft greens and whites. String lights stretched between the trees like captured stars. Rick stood on a ladder, adjusting a bulb above the patio. Below, Monica sat on a bench, playing a quiet tune on a portable piano. It was the first song she had played since she was a teen. Lily's laughter rang through the air. Stronger now, the little girl danced barefoot in the grass, cheeks rosy, basket in hand. "Mommy Monica," she called. "Look, a heart-shaped leaf." Monica turned, eyes lit with joy. "It's beautiful, just like you." Lily ran to her. Rick joined them, wrapping his arms around Monica from behind. She leaned into him. "You gave my daughter a new heart," he whispered, "and you gave me one too." Monica looked at Lily, still twirling in the grass, then at Rick. "I lost a daughter, and somehow life gave me another chance." She opened her arms. Lily ran into them without hesitation. "I love you, Mommy Monica," the little girl whispered. Monica's breath caught, and for the first time she cried, not from pain, but from joy. She held Lily close. Rick knelt beside them, arms around both. They were together, not broken, not alone, whole in the quietest, most unexpected way. As evening came, the rain returned, gentle and silver. The three sat on a long bench beneath glowing lights. Monica tilted her face to the sky, letting the raindrops touch her skin. No fear, just warmth. Lily rested her head on Monica's shoulder. Rick took Monica's hand, silent and steady. No words were needed. The light around them said everything. And as the camera pulled back, past the garden, the string lights, the soft laughter and the rain, Monica's voice rose softly. "He came to fix a light, but what he lit up was my whole world." Sometimes, the smallest light can pierce through the deepest darkness, and sometimes, a stranger walking into your life at 2 a.m. in the rain is not just a mechanic, but a reminder that love, healing, and second chances are still possible. If this story touched your heart, we invite you to subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories, where every story is crafted to remind you of the power of compassion, resilience, and the beauty of the human spirit. Click subscribe and join us on this journey of stories that heal the soul. Until next time, keep your light on and never stop believing. A poor single mom was dragged out of her own sister's wedding until a millionaire walked in and called her his bride. The phone rang sharply in the quiet of the apartment. Lila glanced at the screen, her breath catching in her chest. It was Cassandra. She hadn't heard from her younger half-sister in months. She picked up, hesitant. "Lila," Cassandra said, her voice flat and businesslike. "I'm getting married next week." Lila paused. "I heard. Congratulations." "Yeah, thanks," Cassandra replied with no sincerity. "Look, we're short on staff for the reception. I figured I'd offer you a chance to work. You need it, right?" Lila blinked. "Work? You want me to be staff at your wedding?" "Don't make it weird," Cassandra said quickly. "You're not coming as a guest, obviously. Just help out. Bussing tables, clearing plates, you know, what you're used to." Lila swallowed hard. "I see. Good. Arrive 2 hours early. Wear all black. Oh, and keep Noah at home. We don't need distractions." The call ended before Lila could respond. She sat still for a long moment, staring at her reflection in the dusty mirror above the sink. Her blonde hair was tied loosely at the back. She looked tired, older than 26. She turned to see Noah, her 2-year-old son, curled on the faded couch, holding his stuffed rabbit, asleep. Her heart clenched. She didn't care about Cassandra's mockery. She didn't care about being made to serve at her own sister's wedding. All she cared about was one small hope, that Noah might, for a brief moment, glimpse the kind of family gathering he deserved to know existed. A week later, Lila showed up early at the venue, as instructed. The hall was extravagant, dressed in ivory drapes, golden candlelight, and soft classical music echoing from a grand piano. She wore a plain black blouse and slacks, her hair pulled tightly into a bun. The event coordinator barely looked at her when handing her a name tag and pointing her toward the service station. The staff buzzed around her, setting up trays and champagne flutes. Lila moved silently through the motions, polishing glasses, folding glass, napkins. She kept her head down. Cassandra walked by once, her makeup flawless, her laughter ringing out like champagne glass chimes. She didn't glance at Lila. Later, during a short break, Lila found a quiet corner behind the kitchen door and pulled the invitation from her pocket. The thick cream envelope had her name scrawled in small cursive at the bottom of a long list of instructions. She read the fine print again. Kitchen help, arrive early. Her name wasn't on the guest list. She wasn't family, she was function. Lila's chest tightened. She folded the card slowly and slid it back into her pocket. Then she stood, adjusted her sleeves, and walked back into the reception hall, silent, invisible, but determined to hold her dignity, even if no one else there saw it. The reception hall shimmered with golden lights, crystal chandeliers casting their glow over polished silverware and white linen-covered tables. Lila moved silently through the room, dressed in her black server uniform. Her blonde hair was pulled into a tight bun, her posture straight, her steps careful. She adjusted a row of champagne glasses, making sure they were evenly spaced, then folded the last napkin with precision. The clinking of silverware and soft murmur of conversation created a strange symphony around her, one she was clearly not part of. She kept her eyes low. Her presence was meant to be invisible, a shadow on the edge of her sister's perfect day. Just as she turned to retrieve a tray, a voice from behind interrupted the delicate rhythm of her quiet work. "Excuse me," a woman asked politely. "Aren't you the bride's sister?" Lila froze. She hadn't expected to be recognized. She turned slowly to face the older woman, a distant relative, maybe one of their father's cousins. Before Lila could respond, Cassandra's voice rang out sharply from across the room. "She was," Cassandra said, approaching with a flute of champagne in hand and a perfect smile that didn't reach her eyes. "She used to be. Now she's just staff." A few guests nearby turned their heads. The room didn't fall silent, but the tension spread quickly, like a spilled drink across white linen. Lila kept her mouth shut, her face neutral, even as her cheeks burned. "Oh," the guest murmured, clearly uncomfortable. I didn't realize." "That's all right," Cassandra said, brushing a hand through her styled hair. "She's used to being overlooked. Right, Lila?" Lila didn't respond. She turned back to her tray, but Gloria's voice cut through next, louder, firmer, echoing through the open space. "Frankly," Gloria said from her table, raising her glass slightly, "we'd all be better off if no one remembered her at all. Lila is the kind of mistake families try to forget." The air shifted. Conversations paused. Laughter faltered. Heads turned. Lila's hand trembled as she steadied the tray, her breath caught in her throat. For a brief second, she considered running. Just then a small voice cried out, "Mama!" Noah. He had slipped from the back room where one of the kitchen staff had agreed to watch him for a few hours. His chubby legs carried him across the dance floor as fast as he could manage, his little shoes squeaking on the polished marble. He wrapped his arms around her leg, looking up at her with a bright, innocent smile. Lila crouched down, scooped him into her arms, and pressed her cheek to his head. The room burst into soft laughter. "But it wasn't kind. Oh, how precious," a woman said mockingly. "Staff and entertainment. She even brought the kid to work," another added. Gloria stood and placed her champagne flute down with a deliberate clink. "Can someone please remove that child before he ruins the decor? This is a wedding, not a daycare center." The murmurs grew louder, a chorus of judgment layered with mockery. Lila held Noah tighter. "Some people don't know their place," Cassandra said loudly, tossing her hair over her shoulder. Lila rose to her feet slowly, still holding her son. Her eyes scanned the crowd, so many familiar faces now twisted by condescension and laughter. For 1 second she met her father's gaze. He looked away. She turned toward the kitchen, determined to leave with what dignity she had left. But behind her, the whispers continued, sharp and cruel. She should be ashamed. No wonder they don't speak of her. "Did you hear she doesn't even know who the father is?" The laughter followed her as she walked, each step heavier than the last, but Lila didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She simply held her son close and walked through the noise, silent but unbroken. Lila moved through the bustling kitchen with the grace of someone used to going unnoticed. In her hand was a paper napkin, folded around a small piece of wedding cake she had quietly picked from a half-eaten plate. It was just a corner, a bit of frosting, but enough for Noah to feel included, enough to make him smile. She pushed open the heavy staff lounge door and stepped inside. The space was dim and quiet, a sharp contrast to the grandeur outside. Noah was curled up on the small bench in the corner, hugging his stuffed rabbit. His eyes lit up when he saw her. "Hey, sweetheart," Lila whispered, kneeling down. "Look what Mama brought you." She unfolded the napkin carefully and placed the cake in his small hands. He squealed softly with excitement and dug in, frosting smearing on his fingers. Lila watched him with a tender smile, her heart aching with the beauty and sadness of the moment. Just then the door creaked open behind her. A man in a navy blue suit stepped inside. He was middle-aged, clearly a guest, though not someone Lila recognized. He paused, watching the scene. "That's your boy?" he asked gently. Lila nodded, standing slowly. "Yes, sir." "He's adorable," the man said. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a folded bill, offering it to her with a kind expression. "Here, buy him something sweet later." Lila blinked. Then she shook her head. "Thank you, but no." The man looked surprised. "It's just a gift." "I'm sorry," she said softly, "but I'm not selling myself just because we're hungry." Her words hung in the air, dignified and quiet. The man's expression shifted to respect. He nodded and tucked the bill away, then exited without another word. Unbeknownst to either of them, a wedding photographer had been walking past the open doorway and snapped a photo of the moment. The mother, the child, the money refused. He later posted it online with the caption, "Some dignity can't be bought. Remember her." By the time the photo began to spread across social media, Lila had returned to her duties. Cassandra found out within the hour. A bridesmaid showed her the photo on her phone. Within minutes, she was seething. "She made me look heartless," Cassandra hissed. "She's hijacking my wedding with her sob story." She stormed into the lounge where Lila was wiping Noah's mouth. "You think you're a saint now?" Cassandra snapped. "The poor little waitress who turned down a tip for her bastard child? You're humiliating me in front of the elite." Lila stood, shielding Noah instinctively. "I didn't ask for attention. I was just feeding my son. "Well, you've fed enough," Cassandra growled. "Get out, you've done enough damage." Before Lila could answer, Noah ran toward her and tripped over a rug near the doorway. In an instant he collided with a passing waiter, knocking over a full tray of water. A cascade of clear liquid splashed across Cassandra's white designer gown. There was a collective gasp from the hallway. Cassandra stared down at the stain, speechless for half a second, then screamed, "My dress! It's ruined! This is a $12,000 0-cents gown!" Gloria came marching in like a general. "What happened?" "She threw water on me," Cassandra shouted, pointing at Lila. "I didn't," Lila tried to explain. "She's sabotaging everything," Cassandra wailed. Gloria's face hardened. "Enough. Get her out of here." A pair of venue security guards approached. "No, please," Lila begged, backing away while holding Noah. "You and that child have no place here," Gloria snapped. "Drag them out, now." One guard grabbed Lila's arm roughly. The other tried to take Noah from her. Lila twisted away, stumbling. "Mama!" Noah screamed, tears bursting from his eyes. Lila fell hard onto the marble floor. Her elbow slammed against the edge of a chair, tearing her sleeve. Blood smeared across her arm. The rip in her uniform exposed her scraped skin. Gasps echoed around the room, but no one stepped forward. "Keep moving!" Gloria barked. The guards pulled her up, dragging her toward the exit. Noah clung to her, wailing. And in that brutal moment, in that image of a mother bloodied and broken, her child screaming in terror, every cruel whisper became reality. Lila was no longer just ignored. She was thrown out, cast aside, like something dirty. But fate hadn't finished writing this night, because just as the grand doors creaked open and she was pushed into the cool night air, someone else was walking up the steps, and he had seen everything. The heavy doors groaned open as the guards pushed Lila and Noah toward the exit. Her hair was disheveled, her uniform torn at the elbow where blood still trickled, and her arms trembled as she held her crying son close. Just as one of the guards reached to open the last door to the street, a sharp, commanding voice cut through the chaos like a lightning bolt. "Do not touch her!" The words echoed with authority. Everyone froze. The guards turned first, followed by Gloria, Cassandra, and a dozen wide-eyed guests craning their necks toward the entrance. A sleek black luxury sedan had just pulled up outside, its headlights still glowing. From the back seat emerged a tall, impeccably dressed man in a charcoal gray suit. His presence seemed to silence the very air itself. Daniel Rhodes, the name murmured through the room like a ripple in still water. He stepped forward, calm but with an unmistakable fire in his eyes. His sharp jawline and dark eyes gave him a magnetic, dangerous elegance. Guests parted like waves as he walked through them, ignoring the stares and whispers, until he reached Lila and Noah. "Lila," he said softly, kneeling beside her. "Are you all right?" She looked up, breathless, still in shock. "Daniel, why are you here?" "I came as soon as I saw the post. I should have been here earlier." He took off his pocket square and gently wrapped it around her bleeding elbow. Then, without hesitation, he lifted Noah into his arms and turned toward the crowd. Noah clung to him like he had always known this man. Daniel looked at the guards. "Let her go, now." The guards hesitated. Gloria stepped forward, indignant. "Excuse me, who exactly do you think you are? This is a private event." He stood tall, his voice cool but full of steel. "Daniel Rhodes, founder of Rhodes Capital. The man who funded this venue, the floral company, the caterers, the wine selection, and the honeymoon suite. Every contract tied to this wedding bears my signature." The silence that followed was thunderous. Gloria blinked. I didn't know you were attending. I was supposed to arrive earlier, but my flight was delayed. And yet somehow I arrived just in time to witness you throw the mother of my future child out like garbage." Cassandra gasped. "Future child?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "Yes, Lila is the woman I love, and if anyone here has the audacity to insult her again, I will personally ensure every vendor pulls out of this wedding, effective immediately." The room erupted with shocked gasps. "You wouldn't dare," Gloria whispered, her face drained of color. Daniel turned to her, dead serious. "Try me." He then turned to the stunned guests, his voice now louder, steadier. "Let me be very clear. Lila is not just some waitress. She is a survivor, a mother, a woman who's worked harder than any of you could imagine to give her son a life of dignity. She didn't crash this wedding. She was invited to work by a sister who treated her like filth, and yet she still came because she wanted her son to believe in family, even if no one here treated her like one. Lila's lips parted, tears rising in her eyes, not from humiliation, but from something she hadn't felt in years. Protection. Daniel faced Cassandra next. And you? You let your own sister serve drinks at your wedding, then turned on her in front of your guests. That's not just cruel, that's disgraceful. Cassandra stammered, her voice brittle. You don't understand. No, he interrupted, you will, because this ends now. He turned back to Lila and held out his hand. Come with me. Lila stared at him, stunned. She stood slowly, her hand still trembling. Daniel handed Noah back to her gently, and together they turned to leave. As they passed Gloria, she hissed under her breath, You're ruining everything. Daniel glanced at her, eyes cold. No, I'm saving the only part of this night that ever mattered. And with that, they stepped outside into the fresh air, leaving behind the glittering ballroom full of stunned silence and the ruins of Cassandra's perfect wedding. Daniel led Lila and Noah into the quiet of the courtyard, away from the murmurs that still buzzed behind the ballroom doors. The sky had darkened, the first stars glinting faintly overhead, but the courtyard lights bathed them in a warm, golden hue. Daniel offered Lila a seat on the stone bench, and she sat down slowly, Noah resting against her chest, thumb in his mouth. She looked up at Daniel, still dazed. Why did you come? Why did you say all of that? He knelt before her, his voice low and steady. Because it is the truth, and because I owe you more than you'll ever know. She shook her head. You don't owe me anything. He smiled faintly. Yes, I do. You just don't remember. Lila frowned in confusion. Daniel looked toward the ground for a moment, as if gathering courage, then met her eyes again. A year ago I walked into this very restaurant. Not as Daniel Rhodes, not as a millionaire. I came dressed in a chef's coat and hat, part of an internal audit. I was testing staff integrity, empathy, humanity. Most people ignored me. Some were rude, a few were polite. But only one person saw me, really saw me. Lila's lips parted slightly. You, he continued, you saw a tired man on a late shift. You brought me water without asking. And when you saw me struggling with my tray, you split your lunch with me. A simple sandwich, half a muffin. You didn't know who I was. You didn't even ask. I don't remember, she whispered. He smiled gently. That's exactly why it mattered. Lila sat still, tears pooling quietly in her eyes. Daniel looked around, then rose to his feet and turned back toward the ballroom, voice raised so the crowd just beyond the threshold could hear him. You all see me as a man of success, power, money, but none of that gave me peace. For years, I was surrounded by luxury, but hollow inside. It was a tired woman in a stained apron, feeding someone she thought was a struggling kitchen worker, who reminded me what it means to care. She gave me something no deal, no merger, no empire ever could. He looked back at Lila. She gave me trust. She gave me hope. Inside, the tension shifted. Gloria, standing rigid near the doors, opened her mouth to object, but her voice trembled. Cassandra, red-faced, stepped forward. What is this? Some dramatic performance? She was nothing before this night. You think she's going to become some kind of what? A millionaire's wife? Seriously? Her laugh was sharp and bitter. She doesn't belong in our world. Daniel turned slowly, his voice calm but unyielding. And that's exactly why she deserves it. She doesn't care about status. She never once tried to climb. She helped without expecting anything. She's already richer in the things that matter than most people in that room. Cassandra scoffed. You're throwing away everything. For her. Daniel stepped forward. I'm choosing the one person who made me feel human again. If that's throwing something away, then good riddance. The murmurs inside the hall began to shift. No longer whispers of judgment, but of admiration. One by one, a few guests stood. Then more. A slow ripple of applause began to build, until the whole room was clapping. Leela looked through the open doors in disbelief. People, elegant, polished people, were clapping for her. Suddenly, the manager of the restaurant emerged from the crowd, moving quickly toward them. A man in his 60s, with salt and pepper hair and a stiff bow tie, stopped before Lila, eyes full of shame. "Ms. Lila," he said solemnly, bowing slightly, "please accept my sincerest apologies. I did not recognize your importance, both to Mr. Rhodes and to this place. It was my failure." She blinked, unsure what to say. "Had I known," he continued, "I would never have allowed you to be treated that way. You are clearly the most important person in our owner's life." Lila's voice wavered. "I don't need titles or special treatment. I just wanted to feed my son." Daniel stepped beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "And in doing that, you reminded me what it means to truly live." The applause swelled again, echoing across the courtyard like music. But Lila no longer heard it. She looked up at Daniel, truly looked, and for the first time in years, she smiled. A real smile, one born not of relief, but of being seen and chosen. Daniel gently led Lila and little Noah back into the grand reception hall, past the stunned guests, the marble pillars, the scattered petals, and the orchestra that had long since quieted. The whispers faded as all eyes turned to them. This mother, once dismissed, now returning like a queen, with her prince in her arms and a king at her side. Without a word, Daniel guided her to the head table, the place of honor once reserved for Gloria. He pulled out the ornate chair, helped Lila sit, and then lifted Noah onto her lap. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Gloria, still lingering near the stage, looked as though she'd been physically slapped. Her seat, her power, now belonged to the woman she had called a disgrace. Daniel stepped aside and picked up the microphone from the podium. He tapped it once, the feedback crackling lightly. "I'd like to give the floor to someone who deserves it far more than I do," he said simply, turning toward Lila. Lila's eyes widened, but Daniel nodded gently. She took a deep breath, then stood slowly. Her torn sleeve had been patched with Daniel's handkerchief. Her cheeks flushed, but her chin was high. She walked up to the podium and looked out at the guests who had laughed at her, ignored her, whispered behind her back. And then she looked at Noah, who reached for her with a gummy smile. "My name is Lila," she began, voice steady, despite the trembling inside. "Some of you may know me as the waitress or the kitchen help. Some may know me as the woman who was asked to serve at her own sister's wedding." She paused. No one moved. "I've been called a burden, a stain, a failure, but let me tell you what I truly am." She looked down at Noah, her voice softening. "I'm a mother, and this boy, this beautiful, bright boy, is not my shame. He is my light, my reason for waking up every morning, no matter how cold, how hungry, how alone." Noah clapped once, then giggled. A few smiles broke out among the guests. "I'm not here to chase wealth," Lila continued, "or titles, or revenge. I don't need to sit at your tables to know my worth, but today, just for once, I ask for respect. Not pity, not favor, just the simple acknowledgement that I'm a human being, a woman, a mother, and that's more than enough." A hush fell over the hall. Different now. Not discomfort, reverence. At the far end of the table, Mr. David, Lila's father, rose slowly. His face, long, passive, and neutral, was crumpled with emotion. His eyes were red, his lips trembled as he approached. "I should have protected you," he said, his voice hoarse. "I let others decide how I treated my own daughter. I was weak, and I'm sorry, Lila. From the depths of my soul, I'm sorry." Lila blinked, shocked. For years he had stood by silently while others broke her spirit, and now here he was, breaking down in front of everyone, his apology raw and long overdue. She gave him a slow nod. Nothing more needed to be said. Noah, now squirming in Daniel's arms, reached out toward the microphone. Daniel chuckled and handed it to him for a moment, and then it happened. Noah leaned close to the mic, gripped it clumsily with both chubby hands, and blurted, "Daddy!" The word echoed through the hall like a cannon blast. Lila froze. Daniel's eyes widened, then softened with tears. A gasp rose from the crowd, some shocked, others deeply moved. Cassandra scoffed, but it was too late. The sound of applause followed almost instantly. Noah wiggled happily, arms outstretched toward Daniel, completely unaware of the storm he had just quieted. With a single word, Daniel stepped forward, took Noah into his arms, and kissed the boy's forehead. "He's got perfect timing," he whispered, his voice thick. As the applause continued, Daniel took Lila's hand, their fingers lacing together naturally. And in that moment, under the golden chandeliers and flickering candlelight, something greater than ceremony or spectacle filled the room. Something real. Something like love. 1 week after the wedding disaster, the full video from the reception was broadcast on national television. Edited from several angles, guests' cell phones, the venue's security footage, and the wedding photographer's clips, it told a story that gripped the country, not of romance between the bride and groom, but of cruelty, courage, and an unexpected hero, a waitress with a torn sleeve, and a little boy who called a billionaire Daddy. The segment aired on morning talk shows, evening news specials, and viral TikTok recaps. By midday, hashtags began trending. Justice for Lila, Mother with Honor, from waitress to queen. The internet erupted in support. Comment sections overflowed with empathy, outrage, and admiration. Women shared their own stories of being belittled and underestimated. Men praised Daniel's fierce defense and humility. Mothers everywhere saw themselves in Lila's tearful speech and unwavering love. And the backlash was immediate, for the ones who deserved it. Gloria, once a staple in local charity boards and high society fundraisers, found herself blacklisted overnight. Sponsors pulled out from her fashion events. Philanthropic contracts were terminated. Her publicist quit. Her once perfect facade crumbled as video clips of her sneering at Lila were reposted with captions like, "The real evil stepmother." Cassandra fared no better. Investigative bloggers, digging into her sudden rise in the influencer world, uncovered forged transcripts from an elite culinary school. Brand deals vanished. Her fanbase abandoned her. An interview she gave to defend herself only made things worse as she came off dismissive and bitter. The world had made up its mind. Cassandra was not the star of the wedding, she was the villain. Meanwhile, Lila's life transformed. Daniel, true to his word, launched the Lila Grace Foundation, a scholarship program for single mothers pursuing vocational training or higher education. Women like Lila, he said in the press release, deserve more than charity. They deserve opportunity, dignity, and a chance to rewrite their stories. Lila, overwhelmed but deeply moved, decided to turn her quiet strength into something more. She started a small YouTube channel, Meals with Mama Lila, where she shared easy, affordable recipes for struggling families. Her first video, Noah sitting on the counter, giggling as she stirred soup, got over 2 million views in a week. Her second video opened with the words, "I used to scrub pots in this kitchen. Now, I cook for people who need comfort, hope, and love." Brands began to reach out, not for exploitative deals, but collaborations rooted in authenticity. Moms across America subscribed, not because of the viral fame, but because they saw something real. A woman who had once been them. Daniel stood quietly behind her success, never overshadowing her light. He appeared in only a few videos, usually in the background, chopping vegetables or washing dishes, occasionally making Noah laugh with funny faces. Lila became more than a symbol, she became a movement. From waitress to warrior, from forgotten sister to beloved mother, from humiliation to honor. And in every comment section, every media headline, every message of support, one thing was clear. The world had watched a woman rise, and she did not rise alone. She carried a son on her hip, a heart full of grace, and a love that turned even the coldest ballroom into a home. The sun dipped low over the horizon, casting a golden sheen across the quaint garden behind the restaurant where it had all begun. A place once filled with the clatter of dishes and whispered orders, now transformed into something sacred. Fairy lights twinkled gently between the tree branches, and the scent of blooming jasmine danced through the late summer air. There were no white doves, no designer gowns, no red carpets or celebrity photographers. Just 20 or so people gathered in wooden chairs, forming a circle of warmth around Lila, Daniel, and little Noah. Lila stood beneath a modest arch made of ivy and wildflowers, her blonde hair in soft waves, a simple linen dress hugging her frame. She wore no veil, no jewels, just a quiet glow in her eyes that had nothing to do with makeup and everything to do with healing. Daniel wore a navy mule suit, sleeves rolled just slightly, his boutonniere hand-picked by Noah that morning, a crooked daisy and a sprig of mint. As he watched Lila approach, hand in hand with her son, he swore he had never seen anything more perfect. The officiant gave a gentle nod, and the hush fell over the gathering. But before the ceremony could begin, Noah, with determined little steps and a serious look on his face, walked up to Daniel, holding a tiny satin pillow. On it, tied with ribbon, were two simple silver bands. The guests chuckled softly, some wiping away tears already. Daniel bent down on one knee, not because tradition asked it, but because his heart did. He looked up at Lila, took her hand and whispered, "I know you never needed saving. I know you were strong long before I ever showed up. But I also know that since the moment I saw you again, you've been the heartbeat I didn't know I was missing." Lila's lips trembled, her free hand over her chest. "You don't need a fancy title. You've never asked for anything, but if you'll have me, I'd be honored to call you my wife. Not because I can offer you riches, but because you've already given me more than I thought I'd ever deserve." A soft wind rustled through the leaves, and Noah giggled as he sat cross-legged in the grass watching. Lila wiped a tear from her cheek and dropped to her knees with him. So she and Daniel were eye to eye. "You gave us a place," she said. But more than that, you gave my son someone to look up to, and me, someone to lean on. Not because I'm weak, but because even strong women need soft places to fall." She leaned in and kissed him, gentle, grateful, whole. The officiant smiled and stepped forward. "By the power of love, of second chances, and the fierce strength of family, I now pronounce you partners for life." The guests rose in applause, not thunderous but full, like rain on parched soil. Behind them, near the garden gate, stood a small wooden sign newly carved. It read, "Lila's Table, where dignity is always on the menu." It had been Daniel's idea, turning the garden into a community kitchen where single mothers could gather, learn, cook, and eat without fear of judgment. But he insisted on naming it after the woman who had once scraped frosting off plates in silence and had now become a voice for thousands. As the sun slipped behind the city skyline, the newlyweds danced barefoot on the grass, with Noah running circles around them, his laughter ringing out into the warm evening like the sweetest music of all. There was no orchestra, no paparazzi, just one family, born not from perfection, but from resilience. And as the stars began to appear overhead, Lila looked at her son, then at her husband, and whispered softly to herself, This is everything." And so, from a kitchen corner to a garden filled with light, Lila's journey reminds us all, dignity is not something given by status, but something earned through love, courage, and unshakable grace. She was once invisible, now she is unforgettable. Because sometimes, it's not the most glamorous wedding that makes the headlines. It's the one that heals the heart. If this story moved you, inspired you, or brought even a single tear to your eye, don't forget to like, share, and most importantly, subscribe to Soul-Stirring Stories, where we bring you true stories of resilience, redemption, and the kind of love that changes lives. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.